Herkese günaydın. Bugünkü webinarımıza hoş geldiniz. İsmim Yasemin Erdal. Artık daha önceki webinarlarımızda tanıyanlar, katılanlar yavaş yavaş tanımışlardır sanırım. Çünkü bugün 9 seriden oluşan bir etkinlikler serisinin 7. webinar etkinliğimiz. Bu webinarlar Avrupa Birliği ve Türkiye Cumhuriyeti tarafından finanse edilen Ufuk 2020'de Türkiye adlı Avrupa Birliği projesinin ikinci fazı kapsamında finanse edilen Sanayi Bakanlığı'nın rekabetçi sektörler programı çerçevesinde finanse edilen bir etkinlik. Ve bir süredir Zoom üstünden yapılıyor etkinliklerimiz pandemiden dolayı. Ama webinarlar daha önce de Zoom üstünden yapılıyordu. Bu yüzden artık Zoom kullanmayı herkesin aşina olduğunu düşünüyoruz ama gene de bir problem yaşarsanız bize chatbox'tan yazın lütfen. Teknik arkadaşlarımız yardımcı olacaklardır. Kısaca kendimden bahsetmek istiyorum. Benim projedeki görevim KOBİ aracı uzmanı olarak çalışmak. Bu projede Accelerator programından ve Accelerator'a başvurmak isteyen KOBİ'lere çeşitli eğitimler ve danışmanlık hizmetleri verilmesinden sorumlu olduğumuz bir program bu. Ve Philip, biraz sonra tanıyacağınız Philip'le beraber bu komponenti yürütüyoruz biz de. Ben 2014-2018 yılları arasında 5 sene Avrupa Birliği Komisyonu'nda bu programda proje değerlendiricisi olarak çalıştım. Yaklaşık 300'den fazla proje değerlendirdim. Ayrıca çok sayıda projenin yazımında bizzat rol aldım. Bunun yanında melek yatırımcı kimliğim var. Türkiye'deki en büyük 2 melek yatırımcı network'ünün aktif üyesiyim ve aktif bir melek yatırımcıyım. Bu yüzden yatırım süreçlerine de gayet aşinayım. Ve bugünkü aslında sunumda yatırım süreçleriyle ilgili de çok fazla bilgiye değiniyor olacağız. Çünkü gitgide önemi hem Accelerator'da hem diğer Avrupa Birliği programlarında artıyor. Bu yüzden bunlarla ilgili de sizleri biraz daha bilgilendirmek istiyoruz. Accelerator aslında değişti son yıllarda. Daha önce KOBİ aracıydı adı. Duymuşsunuzdur muhtemelen. Faz 1 ve Faz 2 vardı. Daha sonra Faz 1 kalktı, Faz 2 kaldı. Ve geçtiğimiz senede Accelerator olarak değişti adı. 2020'de bir tane Ufuk 2020 ile beraber yani Ocak ayında, Ocak 2021'de Ufuk Avrupa Horizon Europe denilen program başladı. Ve Accelerator'de bazı değişiklikler olsa da yeni programda devam edecek. Henüz tam detayları net olarak, resmi olarak açıklanmasa da Avrupa Birliği Komisyonu tarafından aşağı yukarı çerçevesi belli oldu. Biz de bu çerçeve kapsamında sizleri bilgilendirmeyi hedefliyoruz. Bugünkü webinarın konusu Avrupa Birliği programlarında, özellikle bu Accelerator için olan programda kullanılan bazı terminolojiyle ilgili sizleri bilgilendirmek. Çünkü bazı firmalarımız bu terminolojiye uzak olabiliyor. Tam olarak kendilerinden beklenilen şeyleri anlayamadıkları için de usulüne uygun bir teklif hazırlayamayabiliyorlar. Bu yüzden sizleri bu terminolojiyle ilgili bilgilendirmek istiyoruz. Bazılarını duymuş olabilirsiniz, duymamış olabilirsiniz. Eğer bir problem yaşarsanız İngilizce olacağı için sunum Türkçe karşılığı ya da Türkçe açıklaması açısından ben ve diğer Türk meslektaşlarım TÜBİTAK'tan size yardımcı olabiliriz webinar esnasında. Sorularınızı chatbox'tan sorabilirsiniz. Hem etkinlik esnasında yanıtlayabiliriz. Eğer daha sonra yetişemezsek soruların hepsini cevaplamaya daha sonra web sitelerinde bu yayının kaydıyla beraber soruların cevapları yer alacak. Web sitelerinde gene etkinliğin sonunda sizlere tekrar hatırlatıyor olacağız. Bugün sunumumuzu, asıl sunumu İngiltere'den uzmanımız Philip Fulton yapacak. Ona Yunanistan'dan olan uzmanımız Grigoris Hacikostas eşlik ediyor ve TÜBİTAK'tan Ulusal İrtibat Noktaları Sayın Merve Diyar ve Tarık Şahin Beyler de bizlerle beraber. Yaklaşık 2 saat sürecek bu etkinlik. Dediğim gibi sorularınızı sorarsanız etkinlik esnasında sizlere yardımcı olabiliriz. Etkinliğin dili İngilizce ama eğer İngilizce ile ilgili bir sıkıntı yaşarsanız ben ve diğer Türk arkadaşlarımız sizlere tercüme konusunda da yardımcı olabiliriz. Şimdilik benim aktaracaklarım bu kadar. Ben şimdi sözü Merve Hanım'a bırakıyorum. Kendisi kısa bir sunum yapacak. Bizlere katıldığınız için teşekkür ederiz. İlerleyen saatlerde görüşmek üzere. Hoşçakalın.
Teşekkürler Yasemin Hanım. Herkese günaydın. Öncelikle ekranımı yansıtayım. Sanıyorum ki tam ekran. Herkese tekrar merhaba. Ben Tarık Bey ile birlikte Ufuk 2020'de belki çoğunuz biliyordur, KOBİ Ulusal İrtibat Noktası olarak görevimize devam ederken Ufuk Avrupa ile birlikte Ufuk Avrupa'nın Avrupa İnovasyon Konseyi'nin değişen yapısıyla birlikte Avrupa İnovasyon Konseyi Ulusal İrtibat Noktası olarak görevimize devam ediyoruz. Mail adresimiz de değişti. Eskiden NCP SME'ydi. Ancak şu anda ncpeic@tubitak.gov.tr. Buna dikkatinizi çekmek isterim. Her zaman bize EIC ile ilgili programlarla ilgili ulaşabilirsiniz. Ben bugün biz TÜBİTAK olarak neler sunuyoruz? Çok kısaca ondan bahsedeceğim. Ondan önce Yasemin Hanım'ın dediği gibi aslında şu anda EIC çalışma programı taslak olarak hazırlandı, son haline gelmek üzere. Resmi olarak açıklanmadı. Resmi olarak açıklanmayan şey biz de açıklamıyoruz ki son anda var olan değişikliklerle birlikte belki bir şeyler daha değişecek ve hiçbir KOBİ'miz, hiçbir firmamız bu değişikliklerden haberi olmadan, muzdarip olmasın, son hali gelene kadar yaymıyoruz bunu. Ama burada görebileceğiniz gibi aslında EIC'nin yapısı bu şekilde oturmuş durumda. En büyük değişiklik artık açık çağrıların yanında bu slayttan da görebileceğiniz gibi EIC stratejik zorluk çağrılarının, konu spesifik çağrılarında önümüzdeki süreçte açılacak olması. Pathfinder, Transition ve Accelerator Open'ın yanında bunların bir de zorluklara yönelik çeşitli çağrıları olacak. EIC ödüllerini zaten Ufuk 2020'de de vardı. Bu süreçte de devam edecek. Ve SME Instrument'tan hatırladığınız gibi iş hızlandırma servisi kapsamı genişletilmiş şekilde Ufuk Avrupa'da da devam edecek. Artık çoğunuzun bildiği gibi şu anda ufuk2020.org.tr bizim Ufuk 2020 için resmi web sitemizde. Ufuk Avrupa için resmi web sitemizin çalışmalarına devam ediyoruz. Ancak Ufuk Avrupa ile ilgili her türlü bilgi, haber ve güncellemelere halen bu web sitemiz üzerinden ulaşabilirsiniz. Üye değilseniz üye olmanızı ederim. Çünkü program Ufuk Avrupa yeni başladı. Bazı çağrılar açıklandı. Bazı çağrılar açıklanma yolunda. Avrupa Komisyonu'ndan aldığımız her türlü resmi bilgiyi hızlı bir şekilde haber olarak sunduğumuz için bu süreçte hızlı şekilde haberdar olmanız için üye olmanızı tavsiye ediyoruz. Sağ üst köşede görebileceğiniz KOBİ destekleri sayfasından Accelerator'ın her türlü bilgisine ulaşabilirsiniz. KOBİ destekleri sayfası burada görebileceğiniz gibi. Biz hali hazırda Ufuk Avrupa ile ilgili her türlü güncellemeyi biraz önce söylediğim gibi haber olarak giriyoruz. Ancak Ufuk Accelerator programı genel olarak nedir öğrenmek isterseniz bu sayfadan faydalanabilirsiniz. Biz artık KOBİ'nin yanında biraz önce gösterdiğim diğer Avrupa İnovasyon Konseyi programlarında da sorumlu olarak devam edeceğiz Tarık Bey ile birlikte. Belki çoğunuzun bildiği gibi biz Ufuk 2020'ye hazırlık sürecinde pek çok destek sunuyorduk. Avrupa yolunda da bu destekleri tasarlama sürecindeyiz. Bu desteklerin aslında amacı Avrupa Birliği çerçeve programlarına katılımın artırılması, başvurulan proposalların, proje önerilerinin kalitesinin artırılması, en önemlilerinden biri olarak Ufuk Avrupa'daki koordinatör sayımızın artırılması ve ortaklı projelere Türkiye'den paydaşlarımızın katılımının artırılmasına yönelik cesaretlendirme. Bizim genel olarak amaclarımız arasında bu doğrultuda Ufuk Avrupa için çalışmalarımız devam etmekte. Bir de her sunumumda bu sayfayı da ekliyorum. Şimdi ben İnosap diye Ufuk 2020'de başka bir programdan daha sorumluydum. Buradaki bir çağrıda konsül üyelerinin fon aldığı takdirde bu fonun en az %75'ini KOBİ'lere çağrı yoluyla dağıtması gerekiyor. Bu da aslında KOBİ'ler için çok fazla bir çağrı olanağı sunuyor. Buradaki kare koddan o çağrıların toplam şekilde yayınlandığı sayfaya ulaşabilirsiniz. Bu çağrıların konuları, sektörleri, başvuru şekilde çeşitlilik gösteriyor konsorsiyumun gereklilikleri doğrultusunda. Lütfen göz atın. Çünkü buradaki çağrıları yayınlayanlar, çağrılarda başvuruları alanlar ve değerlendirenler Avrupa Komisyonu'ndan ziyade Avrupa Komisyonu'nun yetki verdiği konsorsiyum üyeleri olacaktır. Belki de Accelerator'a ya da Ufuk 2020'ye, Ufuk Avrupa'ya daha önce hiç başvurmadıysanız bu çağrılar başlangıç aşamasında çok yararlı olabilecek. Hem maddi açıdan hem de sizin deneyim kazanmanız açısından. Çağrılarla ilgili sorunuz olursa da lütfen benimle iletişim kurmaktan hiç çekinmeyin. Benim kısacık sunumum bu kadar. Yasemin Hanım söylediği gibi Tarık Bey ile bir etkinlik boyunca burada olacağız. Lütfen İngilizce ya da Türkçe soru sormaktan çekinmeyin. Web mail adresimizi de burada görebileceğiniz gibi. As you may know, our webinar will be in English. Just Yasemin Hanım and my presentation is in Turkish. So, as you may know, EIC Accelerator has its own language that sometimes can be confusing for the SMEs. Our aim in this webinar is to explain this terminology by the EC, European Commission. Our experts, Yasemin, Philip, and Grigoris, also will give their comments on and feedback during the event. As I said before, Tarık Bey and I will be here during the event, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. So I would like to take over Philip and the team. Thank you.
Teşekkürler Merve. Günaydın, hoş geldiniz. That's about as much of my Turkish, so we are using English. In the presentation to follow, I'd like to just give you a brief update on Horizon Europe, particularly the Accelerator program, which is of interest to main interest to SMEs, and then we'll talk about the main event, the terminology. As Merve said, Yasemin will translate any difficult terms into Turkish to help. Grigoris is an expert in the subject of EC proposals and so on, so he will elaborate on anything which needs elaboration. In getting this presentation together, there are a lot of slides. It is based on the EIC work that has been done to try and bring together the terminology. We tried to separate out the terminology used by the European Commission, but it relies on business terminology. So in the end, we thought we would give all of the terminology and then highlight areas of particular interest to the European Commission judges and indeed to investors. Ultimately, the idea is to get a product to market and to encourage investment and international trade. So, if we can begin with the presentation.
Philip, could you please talk a bit louder?
Yes, sorry, is it, we seem to have a weakness on the line. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
I'll try and turn it up a little bit as well. Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, sorry about that. I hope you heard it. So our presentation. Kemal? Sorry, we seem to have a technical hiccup. We're spread all over Europe, so you can expect these things. Kemal? Ah, there we are. Kemal's woken up. Thank you. just to explain, we're working from our own laptops and of course through our office in Ankara, who are organizing all the technology and presentation. So sorry for that hiccup. Here we go. I think we go. So this is me. Anybody who's listened to our previous webinars, and there have been 6 previous ones, will know I have a background in manufacturing, in working with small businesses and large businesses. I've worked with the EC for over 30 years, and I've been working in Turkey on 2 previous projects. So I know Turkey quite well, and I know many SMEs in Turkey that Yasmin and I have visited as part of the project, as well as those coming to our events. And I hope that our listeners today are people that have met us and been to events. The coronavirus has meant that we're socially distanced, even by country. It's not as good as meeting face to face, but it's second best, and we work it the best that we can. And hopefully we shall all be able to meet up again soon. So this is the project team. You'll see that 3 of us are already present this morning, Grigoris, Yasmin and myself. Odysseus works with the IP, IT, intellectual property, legal, financial and various other issues. Alexander leads the team, but mainly works with the intermediaries in universities, science parks and so on. Okay. So these are our previous webinars. I won't go through them. Each one has a particular topic, and all of them are available on our project website, and that website will be paraded before you quite soon. So the next slide. Our last one, we looked back at some of the issues that we'd encountered in Accelerator. Of course, we're in the transition from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. And today's webinar, I'll take a brief look, as I said, at Horizon Europe and then at the terminology. There's our website. It's easy enough to find. This presentation will also be online within a few days, on our website rather, on a few days. It is on Facebook as well, I believe. Okay, next slide. So this is the logo for the new Horizon Europe, which was released only a week or so ago. Those who've worked on earlier Horizon programs will have noticed a great accent on science and technology. If you look at this picture, you'll see that we're covering a lot more ground. We have green issues, we have health, we have children, and health, of course, is foremost at the moment, lifestyle, as well as technology and innovation. So Horizon Europe, a much broader approach. And I think that's true of Accelerator. It's covering a much more broad subject area. Next slide. And this is how much is being spent, 95.5 billion over the 6 years that the program will run, which is a huge amount. Of course, it's not all spent on Accelerator, but there's a lot of funding there to be pursued. Okay. You'll have seen the 3 pillars before, I'm sure. Next slide. This is where we sit quite firmly, the European Innovation Council, which Merve has just talked about. It seems to be now, or is now, the main vehicle for dealing with SME support and issues. The other pillars deal with science and lots of other subjects. You see them in the center, health, culture, inclusive society, all the issues that are shown in the picture or represented. But we're mainly interested in this presentation about the EIC. Next slide. And there are 3 main programs: Pathfinder, the transition activities, again, which Merve talked about, and Accelerator, getting innovation to market, which is the main issue there. And we're focusing this morning on Accelerator. Okay. So that's where we are. Next. I've called it the new Accelerator because there are differences with Horizon 2020. There's a much tighter focus on getting good ideas to market. There's a two-stage application process. If those who were around a couple of years ago will remember, there was a phase 1 and phase 2, 2 stages that went to 1 stage. Now we're back to 2 stage, but very different to our phase 1, phase 2, which I'll talk about in a second. Previously, you could submit as many times as you wished. That's now limited. And previously, it was all about the market, the SMEs, coming up with ideas and approaching the commission. So it was all about bottom-up activities. And now there's top-down as well. So next slide. On the tighter focus, there's more emphasis on the innovations that can build the winners, I think is perhaps the best way of putting it. And they're looking to use the funding to scale up faster. They're looking for the deep tech companies. High risk, the commission love risk. They like to fund risk as long as it's not too risky, of course. And always there's this disruptive innovation. It must be something ideally which is new to market and is going to disrupt the markets from competitors. Next. Again, anyone who's seen our presentations or been to our events will have seen these 3 headings endlessly. We keep pushing them. The criteria for measuring projects and for giving the scoring are those 3. It must make an impact, it must have excellence, and of course, there must be a good solid implementation of the project to make sure it's going to be successful. So disruptive comes into both impact and excellence. High technology, of course, comes into excellence. Knowing the market is the impact. And these key evaluation criteria will stand for the next program and are what the judges will judge projects against. Next. Those are the sort of key questions. Excellence, does the project have high innovation potential beyond state of the art? Does it meet the pressing needs of the markets? And have you got a coherent and efficient work plan? 3 key questions to ask yourself when you're thinking of bidding for funding. Okay. So the 2-stage process. Stage 1, there's a short application which you can submit at any time. So that's not different. The Commission talk about a 5-page form summarizing the innovation and the potential markets. Having looked briefly at the draft form, all of this, by the way, is unofficial. The official version of all this comes out in mid-March, but this is based on documents which have been leaked to the market. And I think it's fairly certain that this is how it will look. But there is the caveat, it could change. So you can submit the short application at any time. The 5-page form summarizing it. The pitch deck, which previously was only with the full proposal, is now sent in at the 1st stage, up to 10 slides. We see many pitch decks which have been produced more or less as an afterthought, the last thing to do before you send in a bid. But those pitch decks are the basis of the presentation to the judges, and it's very important to get the message over in that pitch deck. A novelty here, they also ask for a video pitch of up to 3 minutes from the core team members to motivate their application, to enthuse, to show the team. And again, that will be absolutely vital in getting to the next stage. All of this is evaluated, we're told, in a target 4 to 6 weeks. Next slide. So stage 2 then is the full application, but this is only done if stage 1 is successful and you're invited to submit stage 2. For this, the Commission are talking about 2 cut-off dates a year. In this year, it will be the 9th of June, the 6th of October. It will be submitted on a designated IT platform. So again, that's different to emailing your proposal. They ask for a full business plan to show how you will go about this project. So in the past, a business plan has always been an essential feature, but now it is one of the main features of the bidding. And there will be detailed information on company finances and structure to see if the company is viable enough and why they do need either grant or investment support. Now, in between meeting a jury, if you're invited, and submitting that application, there is support from European Commission mentoring program. So mentors will help to put all that together for submission. If that is evaluated successfully, then there is the pitch to a jury, which again is carried over from Horizon 2020, and you will be interviewed. So this is a 10-minute presentation, 30-minute interview with questions. The jury is held 8 to 9 weeks after your submission, and the result then given in 2 to 3 weeks. So a lot of differences there, but aiming for the same thing, impact and excellence, and a good supporting infrastructure. Next. Resubmissions are also limited, which again is a change. The stage 1, you can have 2 attempts, and then you can not have another attempt for 12 months. So that's a big difference. And on stage 2, a bit more complicated. If 1 evaluator out of 3 rejects, then it can be resubmitted at the next cutoff date. But if 2 of the 3 evaluators, or it's rejected twice, then it has to go back to a stage 1 proposal after 12 months. Again, a huge difference. If it's rejected at interview, again, you can go to another interview, a second chance. But again, if it's rejected, it goes back to stage 1 and 12 months. So quite draconian measures there in terms of how many times you come back. This really is a function of the fact that the Commission were swamped with applications, and many companies applied 7, 8, 9 times. And of course, that's a huge bureaucratic headache. So this is to thin down, again, to find the winners among the many applications. And of course, the Commission were heavily oversubscribed with even winning proposals. So there will be a smaller number of proposals and I guess a higher number of successes. Okay, next. This top down as well as bottom up I mentioned. So most of the budget is on the bottom up approach from businesses coming in with good ideas, but there will be top down calls. We saw one last year on Green Deal. That again is a feature. And there is also lots of the issues you always see around Commission work, digital society, health priorities, looking after the wider society, relieving poverty, and all of the other things. But there will be some top-down calls which should make for a more focused response from companies in those areas. Next. The key project objectives for Turkey remain the same: supporting participation in Horizon Europe, strengthening capacity in science and technology, helping researchers to meet with their counterparts in Europe, and providing a range of activities to support those things. There's our website again, which has details. Next. We still keep the same logo, but we're continuing into Horizon Europe until into March 2022 is the sort of provisional date, but certainly for the whole of this year and into next year. We're probably about halfway through our program of events and support. Next. So just a reminder of project activities quickly. Next. We have training events, of which this is one, but we have a whole wide range there, from lobbying through webinars, focus groups, and so forth. Next. Networking through brokerage events. There will be an award ceremony later in the year, conferences and so on. Next. Support, which is the area we're in today, the SME support. Providing one-to-one support on consultancy with project writing. We have pitching workshops, feasibility report support, and we've had investment readiness training. And finally, we have our webinars, help desk, training guides, lots of supporting measures, again, all available through the website. Next. Why participate? People ask me. Obviously, the financial support is good. Not only does it provide grants, but it can also lead you into private sector finance. And the fact that you've had support from Europe helps to get private sector finance. There is mentoring support. As I said, there's more mentoring support now under Horizon Europe. But as a company, it also helps you to make a more strategic view of what you're doing, strengthens your commercial activity, gives you more confidence really with financial people and so forth. And it can help to amplify the excellent work that TÜBİTAK and the ministry do in providing input into innovative projects. Next. So we move on to the main event. Looking at EC terminology. If you have any questions, by the way, about all of that, then send them in. You send your questions in. They will be answered online, if not on air. So any questions, please send them in. Okay. Now, Grigoris has been sitting patiently. So, Grigoris, tell us about yourself.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Next slide.
Good morning.
Next slide.
I'm Grigoris Hatsikostas. I'm supporting the Turkey Horizon 2020 project team as a training coordinator. I've been a foot soldier in the European projects game for almost all my career, working in topics related to ICT, agri-food, environment, health, manufacturing, entrepreneurship. I have good previous experience in Turkey for the last almost 5 years now, but also in other countries, apart from my own home country, Greece, also in Serbia, where I was for many years working on European projects there, Bulgaria, Tunisia, Poland, etc. I hope I will be useful today supporting Philip in identifying a little bit the terminology and giving some hands-on examples from real life with respect to what the terminology is behind. So, Philip, the floor back to you.
Okay, thank you. You look much younger in your photograph, Grigoris, I think.
Thank you very much, Philip. Really appreciate it.
Next slide, please. So why is terminology an issue? It's often very difficult to understand. I'm an engineer myself, so some of the accounting terms I find difficult, even in my own language. So when you add in the difference with other languages, where there are often not direct translations or it sounds a bit peculiar, it can get very difficult. So some terms don't translate easily. It's very easy to ignore some of these technical sounding complex things and presume that you have the correct interpretation. Not always the case. And we do see proposals which fail because people have not understood what's actually required of them or the importance of what is being asked of them. Many of the SMEs we find are based on technical teams, and they're often missing the commercial knowledge. If you don't have that commercial knowledge, it's very important to get it in. If you can't afford a full appointment, then perhaps bring in part-time support or asking accountants and lawyers to help. It can be time-consuming to get it right. But we must remember that there's a lot of competition for this funding, and many of those competitors do have specialists in applying for grant support and can elaborate on those terms where we may not have got it quite right. So it is important to have a proper grasp of the terminology. That won't come from this morning. This morning is about covering some of the terms and hopefully will encourage people to look further into it and get a better grasp of what it's about. Okay, next slide. So we had mentioned from Merve about the European Innovation Council. They recognize these problems in small businesses, and they also recognize that the national contact points, the people who represent their countries, as with Merve and Tarek, who are with us this morning, can have also difficulty in helping SMEs to interpret. As I said, a lot of teams are technical and they have difficulty making the transition from technical to a commercial business as they grow. Next. So the EIC commissioned our project partner, APRE, to develop tools and associated definitions for the NCP organization. And it's called Access to EIC. If you look on the web at that term, Access to EIC, you'll find all of the information we're covering this morning and descriptions of it. But again, this will be on our website and is built into this presentation. Next. So all of this is based on a business model canvas, which is a term you may have encountered before. Think of a painting, think of a blank canvas, and you have to put on that canvas the different areas, the different topics, the different tools that will help you to achieve the picture of your business at that stage. So it's based on 4 main business areas, and the rest of this presentation is based around this. It's about the company, which is on the left part of the canvas. You'll see this in a moment. It's about the value proposition. This is what you're offering to market, which is in the middle. And it's about the market on the right side. And then across the bottom, we have finance, which of course comes into every one of those stages. So all of the terminology fits in with this framework. Next. We're familiar with the technology readiness levels. This is well known, and we also know that the Commission are interested from 6 upwards. So next slide. They're calling the technology readiness level in their terminology as business readiness level. Why? Because there are other tools for measuring technology readiness, and it was felt that we're really talking about business readiness level in the terminology we're talking about. And I must agree with them. It's about how ready the business is to progress, and not just about their technology. Okay, next slide. So the first stages, I mean, there is a stage 0, which is obviously the starting point, but in business conceptualization, which is getting the concept of the business, this is stage 0 to 3 on the chart that you see there. So you found there's a perceived need that your offer can satisfy, and by the end of this process, you may have a potential product. You may think it's workable, viable, a good idea. Many of the companies we see don't go through this stage. They assume that the market wants their product, they assume it will buy it, and they jump this stage. This is fundamental. You can't build a building with weak foundations. And many of the companies we see have those weak foundations. So, okay, you've got to a viable stage. The next slide shows us you have to test that business before you go wholeheartedly for it. So market need is what we're talking about. Testing the idea, testing the business. And by the end of this stage, you should have a measured and evolved business and products that match client stated need. Again, many of the companies we see don't ask clients, don't match their need, and then find there is no market for their product. And finally, the next slide. This is the main area, as I said, that the Commission are interested in, and it's about business deployment, 6 to 9, consolidating the product, and this is where the Commission step in. They will cover any particular risk that stop it progressing from 6 to 9, and financial backers are more interested at this stage because the product has proven potential and the company also has potential. So by the end of this process, you've become a trusted supplier and your cash flow becomes predictable and increasingly profitable, which is what we're all aiming for. So those are the 3 stages, and we're now going to look at each of them, but beginning with level 0. Next slide. Sorry, they're the 3 groupings, and they each have their own terminology. So next slide. So this is a business model canvas. It's the standard one that you'll find all across the web. It's fairly, it's a well-tried way of developing a business. I'm not going into that detail. It's simply to show you this is the canvas, but now we move on to how we're using it. Next stage. Stage 0, the first steps. I'm a little bit worried about this guy because those steps are not actually anchored to anything, but never mind. Stage 0, okay? So under company, we have what's the business model, plan, and so forth. In the center, the demand and what you're offering, and the market, who's the customer and end user. And underneath that, lots of financial stuff that supports it. And we'll now look at each of those terms in detail. So next slide. So the company terminology, again, everybody knows what a business is, don't they? But for the purposes of defining it, it's an organized activity to produce and sell goods at a profit. A lot of people forget the bit at the end, at a profit. The business model, that's the company's plan for making a profit. How are you going to model the business? You then have a business plan. A business plan is quite simply, where are you now? Where are you going? How will you get there? So if you can answer those questions, you have a business plan. It's not necessarily a 40-page document. It can be done on just a few pages, but you must set out how you're going to make it work. As I say, where are you now? Where are you going? Some businesses want to remain as individuals. Some want to be a family business. Others want to be giant corporations. But having those ambitions need to be agreed among the team. And then, of course, how you're going to achieve it. Business type, again, important. We have business to business. We have business to consumer, a combination of those. How is the business going to work? Why do we need to know this? Because it's a very different structure to sell, supply, and charge business to business than it is business to consumer, which often takes much more in the way of advertising, stock levels, and so on. Next. Typical business plan, that's a very detailed business plan, but covers the main areas. The executive summary is the top, but of course comes last because it's when you've written that business plan. But you need to know where you're going, the mission statement, company background, the products you're going to make, how you're going to sell them, who you're going to sell them to. You need to look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, how you'll operate, how you'll finance all that, and the timeline for achieving it. If you can look at those areas, that's good. Any comments on that, Grigoris?
Well, I think that the one interesting discussion is whether business plan still remains as a valid model for planning your business or it's outdated. Many modern investors consider that business plan is not needed, that a pitch deck is enough and everything. I'm not so much convinced. Since you spoke earlier about my age, I'm a little bit more traditional. Very often I think that a business plan is quite necessary because it gives the possibility to the business people, to the owners, to the founders of the company, to think a lot of the three things that you mentioned before: where they are now, where they want to go, and how they will go there. And these are very important things. So even if you don't hire a consultant to write your business plan, but you do it yourself, which is the suggested way of doing a business plan, in my opinion, you need to take these things into account and you need to develop them in an organic way. So I'm still supporting that business plan remains a valid methodology.
Yeah. I think, you know, if you're in a meeting with any funding body and they ask the question, do you have a business plan? If you say no, I think you're a bit at disadvantage. So there needs to be some sort of plan. The next slide. I think this is one that Grigoris volunteered.
Yes.
Take us through.
What I want to highlight here, Philip, is that when we're talking about the business model, we're not talking about something static. We're talking about the whole lean startup methodology, which I'm a fan of, developed by Eric Rice in 2011, defines a business model as an iterative process, as an evolutionary process, where we create a business model concept, we make some assumptions, we build some hypotheses, we find ways to test our hypotheses, we set up those tests, we get the results, we analyze them, and based on this analysis, we update our business model concept. Let me give you a very tangible example from my own experience in AgTech. There was once a company called Brew River Technologies. The great idea behind them was to create a robotic lawn mower for golf courses. You know, these places where people go to play golf and they need to be mowed on a daily basis. It seemed like a great idea. This is a growing market. This is a niche market at the same time. There was no similar technology and so on. Once they tried to launch this product to the market, they found out that it was not possible. Why it was not possible? because the golf courses sector had so high profits, so high margins, that they were not so much interested in reducing costs of the lawn mowing. On the contrary, they believed that their customers liked to see people doing it manually, so they wanted to show to the customers that they have lots of personnel in the field. Then they pivoted, they tested the model, they saw it was not possible, and they pivoted. And they turned into a robot that is doing agricultural work, that is working on pruning the lettuce in lettuce farms. The result of this pivot was that 5 years afterwards, they were acquired by John Deere, and the founders became multimillionaires, and now they're investing in other companies. So this little story teaches us that the business model is not the first business model you come up with will most likely not be your last one. You need to go through this testing cycle, pivot to other directions, and move forward.
Yep, I agree with you. I would like to see the robot lawnmower when it encountered its first stray golf ball and see what happened. Okay, next slide. So the offer then, demand and offer. Next slide. Demand, that's the customer's wish to buy goods and their willingness to pay. Now, a lot of companies don't explore this. They assume that customers will buy their wonderful product and they don't ask about willingness to pay. You know, a lot of customers will say, this is a brilliant product. How much is it going to cost? Or we don't know yet, or it will cost X. Oh, I don't know whether we would pay that much for it. So important to check that out. The offer is simply the range of goods. When I mention goods and products, by the way, I include services. It just saves words on the slides to not keep putting services in. But a service, you know, it should be seen as a product for the purpose of this presentation. So the range of goods that a company intends selling. Next slide. So then we have the customer and end user. Again, we all know what these are, but let's just have a look. Next slide. So an individual or business that will buy a company's goods. Yep, good, great. Important to define them. The end user may not necessarily be the customer. It's the person or company who will ultimately use the product. So a customer may be buying your product, selling it on, and it's the end user is different. So important to have the distinction between the two. And then looking at financial, next slide. Oh, sorry, I put this slide in because I thought it very appropriate. The guy on the left saying, if I were our teenage girl target, I would love our new product. And the guy in the center, have you actually talked to anyone to make sure? And the guy at the bottom, what? And leave this room? Many companies don't go out and see their customers and talk about it, ask what they would buy, what they would pay. Instead, it's all done from inside the team. And the team hypes itself up. They all talk to each other about how great everything is. Nobody asks the awkward questions. You begin to approach the market or approach the funding body without ever having found out whether customers actually want the product. Okay, next slide. So the finance ones, next, quite a few of these, we'll sprint through them. The balance sheet. Again, we all think we know what this is, but let's just remind ourselves, it's a statement of what a company owns and owes. And it's the amount invested by shareholders. So it's accounting for all the cash, and hopefully it balances. Bankruptcy, again, something we know, but legal proceedings on a company not able to repay the outstanding debts. Again, the assets are eventually used to pay some of the debtors, but not all of the debtors, because the company has more expenditure than it has income. Capitalization table. This is a spreadsheet that shows the equity that's been capitalized, the total value of shares for the company. When we see these major takeovers, you'll hear that they offer a certain price for a share, which is above market share, and that puts a value on the company. If you take all those shares together, that's the value of the company in the market. So by offering a higher share value, they're offering slightly more than the market worth, and that means the shareholders hand over the shares for cash or for more shares, of course. The cost structure. The fixed costs that don't change, plus the variable costs that change with production and sales. So fixed costs might be the rental of a building, and the variable costs might be the labor costs, for instance, for making the production and sales. Debt capital, the amount of money borrowed by the company. And dilution, this is simply if you have shares and you issue more shares, then the value of the overall shares come down because you have a bigger divider. So when you release shares into the market, your present shareholding is reducing in value because the company is the same value as it was. It's just that there are more shareholders. I don't see any questions coming up, so we must be okay so far. Right, next slide. This is again from the finance side, the elevator pitch. You'll often hear this one. This is literally, I mean, the idea, it's an Americanism. The idea is that if you got into an elevator, hopefully in a tall building, with someone who potentially was a customer or an investor, how would you get your message over in the couple of minutes it takes for the elevator to get to your floor? How do you grab their attention? And a lot of people begin, our company was founded in 1975 and we're one of the biggest, whatever. That's not what people want to hear. What they want to hear is something punchy. We supply half of the Turkish market with something or other, is, you know, what you want to hear. You want to start at the end of such a conversation rather than at the beginning with background. And it's good in practicing that because at some point you're going to have to say this to investors, customers, and hopefully you're millionaires in the elevator. So equity capital, the money invested in a company in exchange for shares. So, you know, someone says, I'll put $1 million into your company if it can have $1 million $1 shares back. And of course, they hopefully then get dividends from those shares as the company becomes profitable. Fundraising, I'm sure you're all aware of fundraising, activities that a company uses to raise grants, investments, anything in fact to raise funding. Investment term sheet sets out basic terms and conditions under which an investment will be made. So if the commission invest in your business or private sector investors, there should be some form of investment term sheet which sets out how much will go in, what they expect out, and over what time, and the obligations to achieve that. Revenue, total income from the sales of goods, and the profit, of course, is the cash remaining after all costs have been deducted. You should be left with a cash sum, that's profit, and it's usually done on an annual basis to fit in with the tax year. Next. So that was the starting point. Some terms there that were of use for startup companies and some that they will encounter pretty soon as they begin to move into business. So the first stage then, business conceptualization. Okay, next slide. This is, as I said earlier, building a business on a perceived need that you can satisfy. So 3 main questions. Is there a real problem to solve? This is the number one question. What is the need? What problem are you trying to solve? Is it a proven problem? If you find a solution, can you actually to make and sell it? So can we solve this problem with our know-how, IP and products? That's question 2. And number 3, is the problem relevant or needed enough that someone will pay an economic price to solve it? Many research-based companies pursue the research track without asking that question. They're interested in the research and what it shows them, not in a product at the end. Now, I know that not all research is aimed at a commercial product at the end, but if that is your intention as a company, you must never forget it. Is it going to be economic? Will people buy it? Does it solve a real need? So by the end of this phase, you should have a product which you're fairly sure customer wants, is needed, and you need to also to be sure of how you can make money from it and what needs to be invested to achieve your goals, to achieve that product in the market. So the business canvas, next. There it is with, again, company, offer, market and finance. So moving on first, next slide. To the company issues. You'll hear things like business ecosystem. There are lots of these terms that have been brought in, I think, in many cases to show how clever people are. Business ecosystem, that's everything in the business range. So the businesses, the suppliers, the agencies, all involved in delivering a specific product. So if we then look at the Business Incubator Accelerator, again, this is a term which is much more common after the last 20 or 30 years, an organization that's designed to help to launch a business or to accelerate business growth by offering facilities, premises, grants, tax reductions and so forth, incubating business. I think this is something that Turkey has been particularly good at in setting up science parks and investing in and growing innovative businesses. Intellectual property, IP or IPR, you often hear, these are the intangible assets of a business that have a value. So ideas, designs, concepts, as well as the rights to manufacture products. Key activities, obviously the most important activities in actually getting your company's products to market. Key partners, fairly obvious, your main partners in achieving that. And again, key resources, the resources you need to actually optimize the business. But that's not just physical, it is also financial, it's also intellectual. And a lot of people underestimate the intellectual resources of a business, the inherent knowledge of a business, and often just see it as physical and financial. Don't underestimate the knowledge part of it. It's what drives the business. And the value chain, finally on there, a series of steps to turn the raw materials and other inputs into the finished products. Again, value chain is a term that we often hear used. It's the whole chain from raw material through to the customer. And of course, along the way, value is added, hence the success of value added tax, where it's taxed at each stage of that process. Next slide. Again, I think Grigoris wanted to comment here.
Thank you very much, Philip. Indeed, I wanted to highlight a little bit how do we move from an innovation ecosystem to a startup ecosystem, because that's quite important. The idea is that thanks to the technology advancements, but also thanks to the widespread of ideas related to building your own company, startups, and the possibilities of having lots of exits coming from tech companies all over the world, we are focusing now on building a startup ecosystem. There is a very good reason behind that. It's much cheaper to innovate through startups than it is to innovate through big established corporates. So the smart money, the capital, prefers to invest itself in technologies which are created by small teams that have much less costs to develop them, that have much less cost to launch them in the market, even if they have a great failure rate than what it has been in established companies, because this way innovation can come cheaper and faster. So this is what we have seen in the past. The innovation was mostly coming from big companies. Many of us remember that our computers were coming from IBM or Apple, or our software was coming from Microsoft, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, what we see is that the innovation comes first by startups. So the main idea in an ecosystem is to build the supporting structure around the startups, and then the big companies come and harvest the best of the ideas and come and acquire this best of the ideas in a much lower cost than it would have cost them to develop them themselves. So whenever you hear about supporting the startup ecosystem, helping young people to achieve their dreams, keep in mind there is a very good business reason behind it. And this is that the startups are able to execute innovation in cheaper and faster, and the failure does not cost that much to big corporates. So that's why the startups have been more and more flourishing all around the world. If this is a good thing or a bad thing, we let the economists decide about it, but certainly this is how the reality exists. Therefore, startups should take all opportunities available for support from various programs, schemes, grant schemes, or supporting service acceleration that exist all over the world nowadays.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Very important point. Okay, next slide. Whilst we're on this, Yasmin, any terms we've had so far that you feel need explanation, or are we okay so far?
No, we don't have any questions, so I think it's all clear.
Yeah, any terms you don't understand, I'll remind you that Yasmin's here to interpret in Turkish. Some of them don't make sense in English, so I'm sure you have questions to ask. Okay then, so we're still on business conceptualization, and we're looking at the offer. So the next slide, please. So the offer terminology, the benefits, this is a statement of what customers get from the product. Now, this can be lower production cost, it can be faster time to market, can be a higher quality product, a lower cost, but these are what you're going to have to sell on, what the customer is buying. So very important to be clear what the benefits are and to evidence them in terms of the benefits. So I saw some lasers recently, and they were saying, you know, it can halve the time to cut through a material, but it hadn't been translated into the cost saving on that, on a particular metal sheet, for instance, because it's high energy. So it's a big financial saving. If we think of the board of a company, you may have one technologist, but you'll have accountants and management and so forth. It's important to convince them all if you're selling a product, not just the technical guy. And I've been the technical guy on a board where I've desperately wanted to buy something because of the technology, but the accountants are not convinced that it's going to pay for itself over time, and you know, will result in a competitive improvement. So it's important to see things through the eyes of everybody on a board. The sales, the marketing, the finance, as well as the technical. The copyright, of course, that's protection of the original work, which usually gives exclusive rights to pass on for a price, of course. Freedom to operate. This is something that you'll see quite a bit in the commission terminology. And it's an analysis to determine whether a product, first of all, may impinge on other people's patents, which if you have a patent, it should have been checked out, or any claims to ownership. Now, if you've jointly developed a product with a partner and you share the rights to that product, both partners would have to agree if it was going to be passed on to someone or sold and so forth. In a family-owned company, it may be divided between 3 or 4 people. So it's important to know if you're seeking investment, how easy that particular patent is to pass on. If it's in the ownership of one person and they own the company, that's fine. But if it's divided out, you need to be assured that everybody will sell. Patent, we've already covered. Property rights to an invention, which legally prevents others from copying. Now, legal prevention, if you have someone, say, in a country that isn't as supportive of the legal system as those in Europe and Turkey, you could have a problem even if you have a patent. If a Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean company choose to copy a product, yes, you have the right to stop them doing that, but it may take years. It may be that it has to go through the courts in those countries where you need to employ solicitors from those countries. And in the time it takes, they can manufacture and sell far more than you can, perhaps. And of course, at the end of the day, it's cost you a lot of money and you may have lost the market. So patents are great. Yes, things should be patented, but it's not a total protection as everybody tends to think so. proof of concept, this is evidence that a design, concept or product is technically feasible. Again, sometimes that's not done. Trade secret, I think we all know, confidential information that gives the company competitive advantage over another. And value proposition, again, another term that you'll see with investors and the commission, a collection of products that a business offers to meet customer needs. It's what distinguishes a business from its competitors, the technical advantage, the price, the risk reduction, and so on. If you have a better value proposition than your competitors, then customers will be interested. Next. So we then look at the market terminology. Next. Channels, again, a means of delivering products to customers. Some people have their own store, some deliver through partners, through agents, through wholesalers. What channels do you have to get your product to market? Customer jobs, again, sometimes you're solving a customer problem, sometimes you're creating jobs, sometimes you're losing jobs. So it's important to know the effect it will have on the customer jobs. Customer gains, obviously saving time and money, getting their work done, their job done. And customer pains, again, this is a term that's often used in commission terminology. What pain are you trying to overcome? What customer pain does your product solve? So what's annoying and troublesome from customers that is preventing their job being done? What pain are they suffering? How are you going to help on that? Customer segmentation, again, a term that's used. Which customer groups are you intending to serve rather, based on different needs and attributes. Who are your customers? Where are they? What segments are they in? And remember, we talked about customers and end users. So again, important to see where the end users are too. Customer relationships, fairly obvious. How will you keep existing customers and get new ones so that you can grow your business? Many companies focus on getting new customers, but don't look after their existing ones enough. And yet they're the easier sell. If you've already sold to a customer and it's good, they're likely to buy more. So important to both retain and acquire new ones. Okay, next slide. Grigoris again.
Thank you very much, Philip. This slide aims exactly to explain what you just presented, Philip, that the value proposition is actually customer driven. So what you see here on our right side, we see the customer profile, and there we're summarizing the gains that the customer might have from a service, the pain that the customer is already feeling, and of course the customer jobs, what the customer has to perform through the product or the service that we are offering. And based on that, we are creating the value proposition, like what are our gain creators, what are the features of our product that will help the customer gain more than he's already currently doing. What are the pain relievers? What are the features or functionalities of our product or service that will allow the customer to relieve the pain in a better and more efficient way than it currently happens? And this is what leads to the description of our products and services. Working the other way around, designing a product without having in mind what the customer has to gain, what are the pains that the customer is experiencing, and what are the jobs that the customer needs to perform, most likely leads into a solution looking for problems. And this is why many of the technical oriented ideas fail, exactly because they don't focus on the customer first. So this was the purpose of this slide.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, customers paramount. And often we see that they're an aside, or people must want our product. Next slide. So on the business conceptualization and the finance side, lots of terms here that I'm sure you'll have heard of before. So let's have a quick look at them. Next slide. So an asset. Now, I apologize for some of these things being obvious, but it's good to have a common term for them. So an asset, tangible and intangible assets that have an economic value. So machinery, tangible, intellectual knowledge, patents, intangible. but they all have an economic value for the company. Bootstrapping, I think another American term, when an individual starts and runs a business completely from their own cash resources or with a bit of help from the family without external investment. Good that you have control, bad that you're limited to growth by your own resources. You know, it's both a good and bad thing. Many companies start this way, overextend themselves in terms of loans and borrowing from family without realizing along the way that they need external help. The break-even point, something which is often misunderstood, the point at which a business starts to make profit. Could we go to the next slide for Grigoris, and then we'll go back to this one. Grigoris.
Yes, thank you very much, Philip. Indeed, here we are talking about financial terminology, which is the so-called break-even point. So let's try to boil it down to a very simple statement. The break-even point is the point where you stop losing money. Everybody starts a company to make money. But the hard reality is that in the beginning, your costs, both the fixed costs, the ones that you cannot change based on the volume of your sales, but the variable costs, the ones who are dependent on the volume of the sales, are greater than the revenues, are greater than the volume of sales. And this results in losses. It's very natural for a startup company, particularly in the high-tech domain, to start with losses. And sometimes companies continue with losses and even have an IPO with losses. This is a paradox that happens in the modern economy that is more related to future promises of results rather than current situation. Nevertheless, for every company, there is a very important milestone that every investor, but also every business owner should have in mind. And this is the break-even. This is the magical moment when what you have dreamed of being a profitable company stops losing money. And then you can hope that it will eventually make some money to continue the growth in investment, to pay back your debtors or investors, and hopefully and finally at the end to pay back some decent return to the entrepreneur himself or herself. So this is something that we need to take into account. The break-even point is the point where we stop losing money by the business.
Okay, thanks. Go back again. So that's the break-even point. Business angel, again, a term that's often used just to state that it's an individual acts as a financial backer using their own funds. And it's usually in return for a share of ownership, position on the board, a number of shares and so forth to protect their investment. Cash, fairly obvious, it's an asset in currency form. Crowdfunding, again, a term we hear a lot. Use of small amounts of capital from a large number of investors, and they can be paid back in products, profits, or equity. A very successful way of funding small businesses, but of course you have to come up with the goods at the end of the day. So next two slides, please. And thank you. So carrying on then, liability. An obligation which is usually financial and is yet to be paid back by one party to another. So if the bank has lent you money, the loan is a liability. Here's one that may not translate into Turkish: quasi-equity, a debt that has an element of equity. So you might have flexible repayment options, convertible loans. It's a loan which will translate back into a share of the business. And it's often a way of securing a loan against the value of the company. If a big corporation wanted to borrow money from a bank, they would want a number of shares perhaps made over to them if there wasn't enough equity in buildings and plant and so on. Not something you need to worry about, but it is a term that needs explanation. Revenue streams, fairly obvious, the way that a company gets income from each customer segment. And seed capital, again, a term often used in the commission. It's the earliest stage of capital investment, usually investing in a startup, often from state support or regional government support, universities and so forth. It's self-explanatory: plant a seed and hopefully it will grow. The next slide, please. So we're moving on then to the second of three stages, ignoring our stage 0, which was the startup. If you have any questions on that first stage, please send them in. We'd love to deal with them, but in the absence of any questions, we'll move on. So business testing then, next stage, next slide, please. So testing and changing the business model to answer 4 key questions. What parts of your business model and product are supported by facts from your clients? This is often sketched over. What factual evidence do you have that your business model will work and that your products are needed and that your customers will pay for them and that the market exists, of course, to get a return on the product? How big is the market you can access and how well do you know it? Often companies develop something which is a novel product, but is not in their experience. They're experienced in the technology that makes it, but they're making it for a market they don't know. And it's important to know that market. Well, we mentioned lawnmowers earlier. You can have a robotic lawnmower, but if you ask a greenkeeper, what would you look for in a robotic mower? They would not only be asking about the ability to control it and mow the grass, they'd be asking what would happen if it encountered a stray golf ball, if that got into it, or a stray golfer, or a golf club, or an animal on a golf course. There would be lots of questions that a greenkeeper would ask that a robotics company would not. And I've been around long enough to see robotics come in as an industrial process, brilliant though they are to begin with. We had a number of them working in a foundry, and every couple of weeks they would break down because of the dust and heat in a foundry. And they needed lots of extra protection to keep moving parts clean. These are things that evolve, but if you ask customers about the actual working environment, you'll find there may be many issues that you've not thought about. So it's very important. Does the financial model fit with the client's willingness to pay? An obvious question. And how are you going to fund all of this? So when you've got to this stage, which is still the stage before the commission are looking to give you a grant or invest, by the end of the process, you'd have a robust and costed product, evidence of the market size and value, a tested revenue model, how it's going to work, clear issue in the company structure, the team, and projected budgets based on a strategy that draws all of it together. So you can see they're looking at businesses which are moving into a larger commercial stage. They're not looking to fund research development. That comes earlier and is funded by other parts of the commission or by national funding. So it's important you're at this stage before you begin to think of submitting for funding. And with the new arrangements on Accelerator, this is even more important. Next slide, please. So a very busy canvas for this one. Let's quickly run through them. The next one, the company. Next slide. So the company then, those areas, again, fairly obvious: CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CFO, financial, marketing and technical. The commission look for presence of those. Now, it may not be that there's an individual who's tasked with only that in a small business, but they would want to know that they are covered. So who is actually covering this aspect? What's their knowledge behind it? So of finance, of marketing, as well as technical. And if you feel that you're particularly lacking in these areas, it can be built into your bid, but your bid will not stand as good a chance of getting through as the competitors who do have that provision. So it's very important to see that you have the team structure. Key performance indicators, I think we all know this one. These are metrics that measure performance against agreed targets. So in your business plan, you may have a particular profit per employee or sales per salesman. It's usually a value per something or other, per annum, per person, per item. And these are used to measure the progress of the business. If your profits per employee are dipping, if your sales per salesman are below expectations, you need to take action as you go along. It's no good waiting till the end of the year and seeing how big a loss you've made. So these are metrics used for the ongoing business to keep it on track. Option pool, back to shares again. Many companies often reserve shares for employees to attract them into the business or to reward them for staying in the business. It's a way of retaining them. Okay, next slide, please. Again, I think you have comment, Grigoris.
Yes, thank you very much, Philip. Here we're trying to provide an example of what makes sense as a shareholding structure, what makes sense as a cap table, as we call it. Let me start by seeing what we very often see in startups and technology companies and what are the consequences. So very often we see a shareholding structure that becomes, from the very beginning, what investors call non-investable. What does this mean? For example, if we have a small team of researchers that they would like to start their own company, and at the same time there is a professor and there is a big research group, and then everybody gets a little bit of the share because they feel this is the right way to do it. And then you have someone who is supporting them in the very beginning in the development, and then they also get a little bit of the share. Then you end up in a shareholding structure that doesn't really make so much sense, because the point is that the shareholding structure should reflect people who are actively involved in growing the business. So a typical VC would expect something like this. The initial CEOs or founders would have something, these are day-to-day people and they're working on the company, not someone who had an initial idea and then decided to continue with his or her academic career. These people would expect to have something between 30 and 60 of the company, with 40 being like the golden standard. Then you need to have an initial team of all the roles that Philip described before, like a CTO, a chief marketing officer, a chief financial officer, and so on. That what we call the C-level executives and the vice presidents. And they are also expected to have a serious stake in the company. And then you need to maintain a good part of the shares, a good part of the stock of the company as an option pool. This will allow the company to attract additional talent as it grows. There are a few very good reasons to do that. Startups are competing for talent. And they're not competing for talent only among themselves, but they're also competing for talent with large corporates that can pay better salaries in the beginning and give better company cars, better perks to the people, etc. They are also competing with government agencies that can pay salaries and secure a more stable career in the future. And they are asking for people to come and work more hours, to put more effort, and to get smaller salaries. So they have to reimburse the people somehow. And this option pool is exactly the way for a startup to reimburse the people that are going to be committing their time, their talent, their creativity into a new endeavor, take all the risks together with entrepreneurs, and not go to a stable job in a big corporate. So this is the reason that an option pool exists, and this is why it is highly advisable to all the startups to foresee an option pool and also foresee enough shares for the main roles that we discussed previously. Thank you. That was my...
Okay, thanks. Yeah, again, shares are just seen as things, but they are useful tools in terms of setting up, sharing, growing, and rewarding in a business, as well as raising finance. And there are, of course, different ways of raising finance through shares as well. So it's a very useful tool, and one, of course, the money markets use every second. Next slide, please.
Philip, may I interrupt you?
Yeah, sure.
Could you, there's a question, could you clarify a bit more what you mean by fast track and plug-in?
Sorry, I didn't hear you quite, Yasmin.
Fast track and plug-in.
Fast track and plugin.
Yeah.
I saw the question. That's not actually on the terms I was using,
Yeah.
but it's difficult to sort of see it out of context. But fast track is usually a way of going ahead of the queue. You see it in airports. If you pay a little bit more, you go through security quicker. So it's fast tracking an application, usually for finance. The plugin, I've seen that in connection with technology, where you've invented a particular piece of technology that plugs into someone else's technology, but makes it faster, more efficient. That term is then used for non-technological subjects. So you may have a particular system for, say, tracking a warehouse storage, where you have a sort of plug-in software that manages particular parts of warehousing, or location software or whatever. So it's an add-on really that makes something better. As I say, fast track is going ahead of the queue usually. Hopefully that answers. If we see the context, we can perhaps elaborate on that one. Okay. So the offer then, looking at the terms for using offers. Next slide, please. Co-design, again, similar to open innovation, planning and developing a product using designers, technicians, customers, all involved in the design. The more you can involve without giving away your competitive edge, the better, because they've all had their input and therefore should be satisfied with the outcome. Competitive advantage, fairly obvious. These are factors that allow a company to produce better or cheaper goods than its competitors. What advantage do you have over your competitors? Now, the next two, very important when it comes to products. A must-have product, that's something that's absolutely essential to customers' life or business. We saw the world panic to develop a vaccine for COVID. A must-have, the world had to have vaccines. Whereas nice to have is something that a consumer might enjoy, but is not needed. So I would argue a mobile telephone, if we go back far enough, was a nice to have. But then it became essential as a business tool, because you could have a competitive advantage by having a mobile phone. And now, of course, everybody would say it's a must-have. I'm not so sure, but now they would say it is. And it's important to have the distinction there, because a must-have product, the customers will beat a path to your door, whereas the nice to have will take much more persuasion and marketing and competitive pricing to succeed in the market. So important distinctions there. And it's great, of course, to have a must-have, because life is much easier and business can grow much faster. Product as a service, that's simply handing over a product to a customer, but they have the right to use it for a given period. So that might be computer software, it might be leasing equipment. It's handed over to a customer, but they don't have the outright ownership rights. Okay, next slide. Some here that probably won't be used, but it's important to know. Service as a product. So that's a group of services all brought together and sold as a product. So you may have a cleaning company who will clean the buildings, clean the bathrooms. Annually, they'll wash all the walls or something. And that's all brought together as one product to sell a complete cleaning solution. So that's service as a product. Unique selling point, and often it's called unique selling proposition, USP, again, a term that's used a lot in commission and commercial funding, a factor that makes a product different from the competition. What you have, the competition don't. Now, it's important here to look at the word unique. Unique means there's one of them. I've seen companies who've listed 10 unique selling points. What is the single unique factor that puts you above the competition is what you're looking for. Willingness to pay, we've already mentioned this, the maximum price at which or below which a customer will definitely buy a product. Now, it's this definitely that's important. A lot of customers will say, oh, we may buy it. If it was such a price, we may think about it. What you're looking for is a definite decision. We will buy it. At or below the price you've mentioned. Next slide, please. A comment from Gregor is here, I think, just to explain that in more detail.
Thank you very much, Philip. What we want to demonstrate here is that in the real world, there are three parts. There is the customer, there is you, and there are your competitors. So technically, where you are identifying your unique selling proposition or your unique selling point, and I would like to thank Philip because he introduced me into the concept of that the unique selling proposition has to be indeed unique, is that you have to find the space that you are doing something very well, that the customers indeed want, and that your competitors are not doing as well as you are doing it. And this is exactly where you're positioning yourself. There is another territory that will always be the unique selling proposition of your competitors. So if you're looking for a fast, well-designed and sleek-looking car, you would be possibly looking on an Alfa Romeo. If you are looking for a reliable, low-cost, dependable car, you are most probably looking at the Toyota. There are things that Toyota is great at, and there are things that Alfa Romeo is great at. So there, technically speaking, there will always be a market for Toyotas and there will always be a market for Alfa Romeos. The problem is when Toyota thinks it's Alfa Romeo and vice versa, when Alfa Romeo thinks it's Toyota. And then we have the lower part of the circles here, where this is something that both believe that they're doing well, but actually the competitors, the customers don't want. Therefore, what I wanted to say here is that in the process of defining your unique selling point, you also need to take into account the unique selling point of your competitors, what your competitors can do well, but also always highlight what your customers really want and try to create a bigger territory for your products or services with respect to where your uniqueness, what your niche market is. Thanks, that was my comment.
Great, that's fine, thank you. It's a term that's often misunderstood and misused, so thanks for that. Next slide, please. So looking now at the market terminology, next slide, please. So competitive analysis, you'll see as we go through these various stages that some of the terminology gets more complex. So please do ask if you don't fully grasp it. So competitive analysis, again, this is what investors will be looking for, a process of identifying your competitors and evaluating their strategies to find your strengths and weaknesses compared, to find their strengths and weaknesses, sorry, compared to your products. So when an investor says, so what's your competition, you need to be aware of who they are, not just a list of names from a trade register, but genuine competitors. You need to have looked at their products and pricing and compared it with yours and perhaps altered your product to make it more competitive. So very important analysis. Competitor, we've mentioned already, but a company operating in the same market sector as you with alternative products offered to the same target groups. So true competition, very focused. Compound annual growth rate. Again, we're into financial terminology, but this is a geometric progression of the value of a company, the growth in value of a company, and it's used to calculate a constant rate of return over time. It's used for comparison by potential investors, the stock market really, just to compare how companies are performing and see where to put their money. Not really relevant to the stuff we're talking about this morning, but it's a term you often see. Early adopters, these are the people who are brave enough to adopt a new product ahead of the others and therefore stand a chance of making a real competitive lead in their sector, or of course, a loss if it doesn't work properly. So they take a risk, and to some degree, this is the commission, they're early adopters, they're making an investment where others will not make an investment in the hope that it comes home. Key opinion leaders, again, it's good to have support from authorities on a particular topic whose opinions are well respected. It gives your product credibility, and that goes too for organizations. So if a particular hospital, which is a leader in its field, are prepared to adopt your product or say that they will definitely buy, then obviously that helps in trying to win funding either from the Commission or from the private sector. Next slide. Again, we're into another stock market terminology, market annual growth rate. These are trends in investments and markets based on the previous year figures. Again, used for setting things like pensions, investment houses and so on. Not that relevant to us today. The route to market, a roadmap to ensure that your products reach customers in an efficient and effective manner. There can be a problem in research-based companies where they are really tied up in research. They love research. They never actually say or complete the research process. And of course, the product then doesn't get to market and may even miss a market because the company have done too much research. So a roadmap will really ensure that you have a particular target by which time you will develop something and by which time it will reach the market. And I've been in companies where I've had battles with research teams who want to do just another couple of months, just another few more weeks, just another 10 or 20,000 euros. But you have to draw a line and say, okay, guys, is it ever going to market? When's it going to be ready? What's the launch date? So route to market, very important. The next one, as Grigoris always says, is not some Vietnamese expert. He'll explain it to us. Over to you, Grigoris.
Thank you very much. Indeed.
Next slide, please.
I think that this name comes from a nuclear scientist from some Far Eastern country. But in reality, it's a model that we use to understand a little bit the size of the market. So I will use my favorite example of agricultural robots to give you an example for how do we identify TAM, SUM, and SOM. Let's suppose that I would like to build a robot that is spraying. It's used for spraying pesticides for many reasons, because it's more safe, because it saves me inputs, because it doesn't require human labor on the farm, and so on and so forth. And I'm looking for investors. The investors will identify and they will ask me, what is your market? So on one hand, you have the total available market. You can go through internet, you can search online, and you can find very nice studies about the total agricultural robotics market globally. This is the total available market. Then, where we have to focus a little bit more, we have to zoom in on the market that is related to our own services and technologies. And this is the serviceable addressable market. So this is the total market for spraying robots, because agricultural robots include also harvesting robots, pruning robots, whatever that might be. So we're looking for spraying robots, and this is the serviceable addressable market. So this is again theoretical market that we can address. Let's now try to focus on what can we really sell. What is the realistic market share that we can obtain in terms of competition, trends, expected demand, where are my channels geographically, what are the other market influences, and so on. And this is the serviceable, obtainable market. This is actually my realistic goal to sell spraying robots to farmers. And this is the size of the market that I should put forward to my investors, because this is the real market that I might be able to obtain if I'm good at all of the other things that my business plan or my elevator pitch proves that I'm good at. So this is the distinction between the TAM, the total addressable market, the big picture, the serviceable addressable market, that is the market that we can cover with our technology, and the serviceable obtainable market, the one that is a realistic goal for us to sell to the customers. And this is, all these three numbers are interesting, but the real market is the SOM, the one that we can really obtain. So that was the explanation. Hope it covered your expectation.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Grigoris. It quite often in proposals we see there are X number of blind people or deaf people in the world, and this is the market. It isn't the market. It's already being served by other people. There are issues to do with language standards and so forth, and the Commission soon turn away from proposals where people have put in a massive market with a massive value and not addressed these subsets of what is practical to serve and what you could actually serve. And of course, it then undermines everything else you're talking about with markets and marketing. If you don't see the size of the market correctly, it negates everything else you say. So it's very important. Thanks for that, Grigoris. The next slide. So underpinning the finance here, let's have a quick look at those. Next slide, please. Cash flow, obvious, the net amount of cash going into and out of a business. Combined revenue streams. This is the revenue from different sources. So you may have products that you're selling, you may have subscriptions, you may have license fees. So it's the combined revenue streams. Common stock, we're back to shareholding again. The shares of ownership with voting rights and variable dividends. Again, financial terms that may not really come into our spectrum at this point, but let's cover them. Double one-off revenue streams. That sounds like an accounting term, doesn't it? The combined sales value over time relating to one product. For instance, an inkjet printer, they're notoriously sold for a very low price, but then the ink cartridges are sold at a high price. So the double one-off revenue stream would be the actual printer plus the likely number of cartridges that you will use over time. And you'll find there why so many people are making inkjet printers, because they're very profitable indeed. If you add up the return there for ink cartridges, they're not interchangeable. They don't like to use refills even. They prefer to sell their high priced cartridges. I think a little printer I have was about 40 euros. And the cartridges, which I buy probably on a monthly basis, are about 30 euros. So this is where you see the value coming in. Shareholding term drag along right. This is where a major shareholder has the right to force minority shareholders to sell their shares. So it stops a minority shareholder blocking the sale of a business or a number of shares. Next slide, please. Due diligence, again, a term you'll hear with the Commission if they're looking at investing, and you'll hear this from venture capitalists as well. This is taking a look at the business, analysing its financial standing before going into a loan agreement. It's a fairly obvious thing to do. You need to see how sound the business is, how truthful the accounting is, and what the potential market is before you invest in the business. So a due diligence exercise is carried out. Having done this myself in technology companies, you have to look for the hidden detail. People will sketch over things they don't want you to know, and you have to really burrow around. So if you have due diligence done on your business, expect to be grilled about the true content, the true market, and what happens to the finances. Enterprise value, the entire economic activity of company, the takeover price. So what the company is worth. This is often a question, if you get as far as interviews with the Commission, that will be a potential question. In 5 years' time, what will be the enterprise value with the grant and without the grant? What difference will it make in terms of the value of your business? Very difficult to understand. It's worth preparing for. It's not the sort of thing you can dream up as you go along. But of course, if you don't know the answer, it questions your thinking about how you see the future and how you see the business growth. Free cash flow, that's the cash remaining after paying all the debts, dividends, or buying back stock. How much cash you have in hand. It's often in a business shown as cash in hand, or cash at bank is the other one. Licensing, we know this one, granting of rights to another party under a financial arrangement. Often missed by companies. We'll see a product developed and you'll say, well, what are you going to do, you know, if this gets through? Are we going to make it? But you need to invest 10 million euros in a manufacturing plant. Do you have access to that sort of funding? Do you know how to manufacture? And the answer can be no. So in looking at what to do with the product, the exit strategy, are you going to make it yourself? Are you going to have it made under license? Are you going to let someone else make it and send you royalties or the profits? or share the profits? Or are you going to sell the product as an idea outright, sell the IP and carry on with your research business? These are again options that an investor will want to look at. And of course, the investor is hoping that the company is sold at a profit and they get their investment, a return back on their investment, as well as their investment back, of course. Liquidation preference, again, we needn't worry too much about this, but this is the order in which debtors will be paid if the company has to be closed and liquidate the assets. Often it's the bank first or the tax authorities first, and then the major shareholders and so forth. Next slide, please. Again, some complicated terms. One-off revenue streams. This is where a business generates cash each time there's a product sale. So fairly straightforward. You sell a product, you get the money. Preferred stock. These are in a family-owned business, for instance. It may be the family members have preferred stock, which get paid a higher dividend. They're often seen as A shares, B shares, C shares, and the A shares being of a higher value and therefore paid higher dividends. Recurrent revenue streams. This is a periodic generation of income. For instance, if you have subscriptions or you have regular payments for leasing or rental or something, it's a recurring revenue stream. And of course, it goes off into the future. So that is also future income and is added to the value of a business if the business is being valued. Tag-along value, it's the opposite one of the one we just mentioned. This is giving minority shareholders the right to sell their shares at the same time and price as a major shareholder. So you're not left as a minor shareholder after a takeover and your shares perhaps go down in value. Unit cost, obvious, the cost to create one unit of your product. Again, that's both fixed and variable costs go into that measure. Venture capital, we all know this one, private equity invested in promising companies. On the Accelerator, the Commission also have a venture capital fund, which is often used in partnership with the private sector. Next slide, please. So we move on to our third stage, the stage which the Commission is particularly interested in. You have to be at TRL level, or in this case, BRL level 6 to qualify. So make sure that you're realistic about where you are with your readiness levels. Any questions on the previous ones, please send them in and we'll try and deal with them. So the third stage, next slide, please, is the sort of final growth into a proper business, shall we say. Stage 2 will have shown you the business and its products are viable. But this stage, stage 3, will allow consolidation of the company and lead to its expansion. So the key questions: how can I make the business more sustainable? How can I organize to serve all the customers and markets I've identified and verified? How can I grow my team to meet this challenge? Because you're becoming a proper company, if you like. How am I going to fund it all? You see that funding question is at every stage. And what element of risk may attract the EC to fund my company, my product? So by the end of this stage, there should be a clear route to growth with agreed responsibilities among the team against a clear business strategy, business planning and budgeting. So like any investor, the commissioner looking to invest in a business with a future, with a proven future and proven markets. Next slide, please. So again, a rather packed business canvas. So the first one, company. Next slide, please. A few terms there that are familiar to us. Business development. Obviously, the ideas and activities aimed at making the business better. Business strategy, we've already touched on. The agreed objectives that a company aims to achieve and the strategic plan to reach them. difficult to get that hammered out in developing business strategies and business I've been involved in. The best thing to do is to take the team off for the weekend, switch off mobile phones, and hammer through what you think the strategy should be. I mentioned earlier, where are we now? Where are we going? How will we get there? But to come up with other ideas for growing the business, discuss them, and build them into, or not build them into, a business strategy. So I've always gone for a 5-year rolling strategy, where you discuss each year, you add a year to your 5 years. So you've always got a 5-year strategy added to each year. And then within that, a business plan for the year, which is in much more detail. So having agreed a strategy for year 1, you then have a business plan, which shows how you're going to achieve that strategy. Now, that may change and will change along the way. So it needs regular reviews, perhaps monthly or even quarterly, depending on the business. You may need to change the strategy, but you all need to agree to change that strategy. Now, an example here is the effect of the pandemic, which has changed a lot of business strategies for good and bad. Some businesses obviously lost out, the retail sector, the holiday sector and so forth, but others have gained when you think of personal protective equipment, hospital equipment, and other things. So, every threat is an opportunity in the business world. So strategies need to change to work with what's happening in the world. And it's important that they do. So corporate culture, again, we're into now a more corporate company with senior people and employees. So beliefs and behaviors on how employees and management interact with customers and with each other. And again, some of these cultures are well known. You think of Nike and Google, and some of those bigger corporations, newer corporations, seem to have a very good interaction with both customers and with each other. Corporate social responsibility, this is a term that came in a few years ago. It's less prominent now, I think, but in any business, they have a role in contributing to the quality of life of society as a whole. So it's not just about shareholders and employees, it's about what you do with the community, and how you develop a role within society. It's a little bit esoteric, but it's something that a lot of companies, it engages with their employees who like to assist in this area. Cost-benefit analysis, simply the analysis of costs against the likely profits over time, so that you're not, the worst thing you can do is produce more and more products which are making you a bigger and bigger loss. So it's important to see costs versus selling price and that there is a sufficient profit.
May I have a quick comment with respect to culture and strategy, Philip?
Yeah.
There is a very famous quote which I'm very much supporting that goes like this: culture eats strategy for breakfast. Behind this quote is the very simple and straightforward understanding that at the high level, you may design the perfect strategy. You may design it because you have the most brilliant CEO in the world, or you may design it because you hire the best consultants that are out there in the market. Nevertheless, if this strategy is not compatible with the culture of your team, with the culture of your organization, either small or big, then most likely this strategy is not going to achieve its goals, because strategy at the end of the day is implemented by people. And if the culture of the people is not compatible with the strategy, then the strategy will not succeed, unfortunately. That was my little comment.
Yeah, that's true. A little story. I worked for a company who had a particularly forceful chief executive, and we discussed the business strategy. This is a company with about 100 million turnover. We discussed the strategy, and he said, "Are you all on board then?" And we said, "Yes, we are." And then we had a coffee break, and he came in and singled out 3 people and said, "You 3 are fired." He'd actually hidden in the gentleman's toilet to hear what people said, and they'd gone in and said, "Oh, it's never going to work. That won't work. It's not us." And he'd actually, singled them out. So you're quite right. Culture clashes with strategy, and strategy won't work without the proper culture behind it. So next slide, please. Human resources, fairly obviously, the responsibility for recruiting, training and maintaining well-being of employees, and of course firing employees as well. There are two sides to this. Open innovation, again, a term you hear a lot with Commission, leveraging innovative capabilities of companies, customers, suppliers to achieve an overall strategic goal. It's a good thing in principle. It's difficult to make it work in practice because of commercial sensitivities. So taking on board, it's a little bit what we said earlier, what customers want, what your designers come up with, gives you a stronger product in the end. Partnership, fairly obvious, collaboration to share knowledge and profits on an agreed basis. Important that that agreement is legal and so on. So many partnerships begin as friends and partners, you know, get on well, something goes horribly wrong, and then you're into long legal arguments about whose fault it is and what share you have. So it's always best to have a legal agreement, even within a family, it's important. Scalability, again, a term that the Commission use a lot, maintaining or improving the profits, ideally, of course, improving them, whilst the sales volume increases. So is it scalable? Can the business grow? Can it remain making a profit? Or ideally, can it make more profit? Okay. Next slide, please. So the offer then, next slide. Again, terms that perhaps good to know but may not be useful. The bundling pricing strategy. This is selling combined products as one bundle. Obviously, it helps you to sell your products if one relies on another. So mentioning our printer earlier, if you sold cables, you sell the printer, you sell the spare parts, you sell the ink cartridges, and even the paper. It's all one bundle that ties that customer to you. Penetration pricing, this is setting a lower price so that you can get into a market and build your sales. Your pricing strategy, method used by you to build your product pricing. So it can be on a cost plus basis. You've taken the cost of manufacture and you've added a profit margin. It can be on market pricing where you may be a much lower cost product, but the market pays a certain price and therefore you can charge that price and of course make more profit, or slightly below that price and make more profit. Unfair advantage, setting your higher margins than competitors because you may have a sales location which is particularly good, say in a particular tourist area. You may have dependence from previous sales, so you have a customer which is tied to you and therefore you can price accordingly. You may have a monopoly of the market, no competition, and therefore you can set your pricing where you wish. Upselling pricing strategy, this is persuading customers rather to buy more than they originally intended by being offered better pricing. So you may go into a furniture store and buy a table. They'll also want to sell you the chairs to match at a special offer, and perhaps even a carpet or curtains to match the chairs. So it's all upselling. Very important once you have a customer on the hook to try and maximize what you can get from them. Next slide, please. So the market, next slide. So advertising, we all know this, the process of drawing customers' attention to products and offers. The brand, again, combination of name, logo, slogan, very important. Sorry, Grigoris, you want to say something? No? Okay. So the brand, combination name, logo, and slogan. A lot of people have a logo, but then don't carry that out with letterheading, vehicles, uniforms, and so on. And it's important to get that logo out there. I mean, I think Coca-Cola is the most recognized logo in the world, and you see it everywhere, the Coca-Cola color and logo. It's on trucks, bottles, employees, it's everywhere. And of course, a lot of advertising in support of it too. Again, that's not a must-have product, it's a nice-to-have product, Coca-Cola. So you know, some would say it's too sugary, but nice to have, and therefore takes a lot of advertising to maintain market share. The brand strategy, setting the activities that help you to bring that brand together in the marketplace. The churn rate, that's the rate that customers drop out. So you may have just one customer who buys one thing and disappears, but if you're in a subscription basis, you know, you hope that customers come back year after year and subscribe. This comes into the looking after customers, you know, maintaining contact so that they don't drop out unless you're in a business where it's the norm. And finally, on that slide, customer acquisition cost, what it actually costs to win new customers in terms of advertising and sales and so forth. Grigoris.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, I'm not sure if we can see the next slide, if possible. I cannot see it in my screen.
Next slide.
Perfect, yes. Here is again some simple thinking behind the customer acquisition cost. So technically speaking, when we're looking at each one of our customers, we also need to think of how much does it cost us to have this customer. For example, the total expenses to attract, engage, and convert a new customer includes the salary of the salespeople, the marketing expenses, the gas and the space in the office that the sales team is using, the promotion material, even the sales, the reduction in the price that we need to get in order to be able to have some customers. When we're talking about fast-moving goods, we also possibly need to think about to rent some space in the supermarket shelves to promote our companies inside the supermarket. And then we need to think about how the number of new customers acquired. If the customer acquisition cost is below the profits, the revenue per customer, the money that each customer brings us, then we have a good reason to continue this business. But if it costs us more to acquire new customers than the customers can generate as revenues for the company, then maybe we need to think of how can we pivot our strategy.
Yep, good point. Okay, the next slide, please. What we were talking about really, the customer conversion rate, the sales conversion rate, lead conversion rate, call it what you like, but it's the proportion of genuine sales compared to the number of customers approached. So you may approach 100 customers, you may get 20 people who are interested, you may get 10 people who genuinely want to buy. Customer lifetime value, prediction of profit attributed to the entire future relationship with a customer. I mentioned the printer example earlier, and that could be seen as a customer lifetime value from the sale of a printer. Customer retention, your ability to retain customers over time through contact, through special offers, through new products coming in, and through personal contact. Funnel marketing, these are the various steps to transform from awareness into buying at the end of the day. And a qualified lead, that goes with our first one there really, customers expressing a definite interest in a product and the likelihood of buying. The next slide, I think, is Grigoris on funnel marketing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So here the slide aims to explain the different stages that indeed form a funnel from people who know about us up to the people who are putting their money to buy our service or product. So the stages in the beginning, what we have to do is to create a lead generation engine. We need to create a way that people know about our service and our product, and of course that it is relevant for them. Then we have to nurture, we have to incubate our leads by creating interest and consideration, by meeting us often, by knowing what are our products and services and what are their functionalities. Sometimes by making them feel special because we understand the needs and we can personalize their offering to them. And then we need to turn from the lead nurture to sales. And this is how can we transform the intent into a purchase by making sure that the customer, the potential customer, will evaluate our offer and they will decide to go with us. In the past, Philip, we have discussed many times about that. I used to work in the consulting industry, and there was this rule of 110-1, meaning that you will have to check 100 opportunities, you will have to create 100 leads, let's say. Then you will have to get into the discussions with 10 customers. This is the lead nurture part, in order to sell one contract, in order to have one customer. And I remember my former boss was very explicit about that, and he was putting emphasis in all three stages, meaning that you need to generate many leads, you need to have a substantial number of discussions starting with potential customers to nurture your leads in order to get a contract. And I think this very much describes how difficult job sales is, and sometimes it's underestimated by the technical founders.
Yeah, it's a very good illustration of it, I think. And as you say, you know, there's a lot of work to get through to those final customers, a lot of dedication. Okay, the next slide, please. So finally on finance then at this stage, next slide, please. This is blended value is a term which caused a lot of confusion, I think, in the Accelerator program. Blended finance, it's the same thing. It's a combination of investment from various sources. In the commission terms, it's from perhaps the Commission's venture capital fund, from private sector fund, and from grants that they offer. So a combination of finance to achieve the goal. The Commission's aim in doing this is to, again, to cover the risk element. So you may have venture capitalists from the private sector who are very keen to support a product, except perhaps it doesn't pass a particular test, or there's some other technical issue that will prove whether it works fully or not. And this is the risk that the Commission are funding, and will therefore offer blended investment, combination of grant to get it over the hurdle, perhaps a little bit of Commission venture capital funding, and then hopefully private sector support. Burn rate, fairly simple. It's the cash spend each month. A lot of companies become cash strapped with growth. They never have enough cash for growth. And that can be one of the main reasons that companies fail, is the poor cash flow. CapEx, you often hear, capital expenditure, that's cash spent to acquire, upgrade and maintain physical assets over time. In a company, you're always trying to minimize that, unless you've got lots of cash to spare that you can afford to invest in upgrading and so on. It's always a balance. It's always an argument in a business. You need cash to buy new machinery, faster machinery, whatever, but then it takes time to recover that cost. So the accountants will be wanting to know how many new customers or how much faster you'll be able to make things, so that they can work out the rate of return on that investment. Debt to equity ratio, that's determining the financial leverage of a company. A high debt to equity gives you a high leverage. So, you know, how much is committed in debt compared to what the company is worth. Again, it's something an investor will look at, and it's something that would be asked in the interviews with the Commission judges. EBITDA, business earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. This is building in the recovery of the investment in capital expenditure. But it's the gross earnings, really, of the business before you start paying anything in taxes, interest, and so on. And then the margin, that can be used to compare between businesses, just to see, you know, what margin, what profit comes from it. Next slide, please. So that can be compared as a ratio compared with other companies, and the stock market uses this quite a bit to see how businesses are performing and where they should invest. Employee stock options, fairly obvious. Grigoris mentioned it, holding stock so that you can offer it to employees at a set price for a set period, or even you can gift the slides as a reward. It's a means of keeping employees engaged and, of course, motivating them into making the business a success so that they get a dividend on those shares. Impact finance, the means of measuring impact on society as well as the profitability. This comes into the corporate social responsibility field, seeing what benefits you are to society as well as the profitability. For example, the COVID vaccines I mentioned earlier have a societal impact as well as profitability. In fact, some of those vaccines are being sold at cost price as a societal improvement. OPEX, the opposite, well, it goes with CAPEX. It's the operating expenditure of a business. And private equity, funds from private investors that are not covered by shareholding. So this may be a loan from a family member to support the business. Next slide, please. The return on equity, again, what the financial brokers look at, the financial performance of a company, which is taken by dividing the net income by the shareholders' equity. So it's the benefit that companies get. Sorry, try again. It's the performance per share, which is again used as a measure between businesses. You can see these things get more complex as a company gets bigger. Return on investment, fairly obvious, the amount of return compared to the cost of an investment. And again, the return on capital employed, similar, the ratio of how well a company is generating profit from the capital it uses. Senior debt, that's the borrowed money that a company must repay first if it goes out of business. If you remember earlier on, we had this sequence of who was paid first if a company goes out of business. And the subordinated debt, these are unsecured loans that rank behind the senior debt in payout order. It's often the small shareholders that suffer, or suppliers who have a claim but are not likely to get the full money returned. Next slide, please. So a quick summary of all that, if we can do such a thing. There are almost 100 terms that we've covered this morning, so a lot of information there. These are all held, as I say, on the Access to EIC website. We'll give you the details in a second. All of this will be on our website as a webinar recording. But just to summarize, there are many terms, as you've seen, over 100 in the business canvas. Now, even though the European Commission don't look out for them all, especially some of those financial comparisons, they're all related. This is why we put them all in rather than just the terms that are used in Commission documents. The investors, private investors and the judges will ask about some of those that we've focused on potential markets, return on investments, the value of the company, the debts and so on. So you need to be well versed in these things, not just for their benefit, but for your own benefit. If you're running a business, you need to know these things to give assurance that the business is on track. Many of them, I mentioned this earlier, many of them don't come easily to technologists, so you need to learn them. I mentioned many companies have a technology-based board rather than commercial, so they need to be known, or you need to engage someone who can help on that. Know the limitations. If it comes to interview, don't try to answer questions that you don't really know the answer to. Rely on other team members to do that. Stick with what you know and make sure you have it covered as a team. Because, as it says there, building and expanding a business is a team effort. And the Commission want to see that as a team effort if they're going to put funding in. Somebody said, you look at the rider, not the horse. It's very important the team comes over as cohesive, working together and know what they're doing, not just, excuse me, not just about technology. The next slide, please. So remember, we're here to help, and I see there are 1 or 2 questions coming in, so please send in your questions now. Those are the websites. They're very long addresses. I'm suggesting now the third one. Simply do a web search on Access to EIC and you'll find all this information on there. There's also a glossary and alphabetical listing. Thank you for participating. I hope it's been interesting. If you have any more questions, please send them in. if we could just move forward to the next slide and the next, there are details, and the next. You'll see there that there's a QR code for you to log into and give us feedback on the webinar. We welcome your feedback because it helps us develop future events. So please give the feedback on that. And now we're open for questions. Yasmin, how are the questions going?
I think we answered all the questions while you were presenting, so there is no more left.
Yeah. And what sort of questions have we had?
Actually, they were mostly about the accelerator program. You know, are we suitable for this? Can we apply? You know, shall we apply for our patents before? So the questions were not about the terminology.
Okay.
Maybe most of the participants were already familiar with them, or you made it quite explanatory during your presentation.
Yep.
So the questions were not about the terminology, but about the general program.
Okay. A lot of companies we find they see money and they say we must get that money, and they miss out the stages in between that we've talked about for nearly 2 hours now, over 2 hours, of working out the product, the customer, the need, and everything else. It's only if you do that, then you can see whether it's worth going for the grant and how well you might stand in that process. If you don't do that, simply applying for the grant is a waste of time because you haven't answered the key questions that the competitors will have answered because people are pretty slick at this. So it's most important to invest the time in the early stages of seeing whether you have a viable product, whether customers will support it and buy it, and whether they're willing to pay for it before you even think of going into the accelerator process. It's obvious, but it needs to be said, I think. So, Grigoris, any final questions?
I don't think I have questions. What I would like to do is to encourage all the participants to stay tuned in our activities. There will be many opportunities for funding, not only through the EIC Accelerator, but also through other work programs or clusters or pillars, as we call them now in Horizon Europe. So I would encourage everybody to stay tuned for the upcoming events that our program has.
Yeah, sure. A good point. Yes, this is just one part of the work we're doing on Turkey and Horizon 2020. It's now a rather dated title, but it is for Horizon Europe. So do look at our website and look at other events. There are lots of them. And this year there is a particularly large number because of Horizon Europe. I don't know whether I have any further comments from Merve or Tarek.
Tarık has to leave. Thank you for your presentation and valuable contribution. I do not have any points.
Okay, thank you for that. So I hand over to Yasmin. Thank you for tuning into us this morning. Sorry about the earlier technical hiccups. It always happens. If you're ever talking about technology, guarantee that the technology fails you. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you again in March, when we'll be talking more about the new Accelerator program. So goodbye for now, and over to Yasmin for a few final words.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Teşekkür ederiz herkese katılmanız için. Chatbox'ta yazdığım 2 tane web sitesi var. O web sitelerini önümüzdeki hafta itibariyle bugünkü etkinliğin kaydını ve tüm sunumları koyuyor olacağız. Oraya girip etkinliği tekrar dinleyebilir, izleyebilir ve sunumlara erişebilirsiniz. Ayrıca sorulan soruların cevapları da gene sorularla birlikte web sitesinde yer alacak. Zoom platformu yaklaşık bir yarım saat kadar açık kalacak. Eğer sorularınız olursa sunum esnasında aklınıza gelmeyen ama daha sonra aklınıza takılan, bu yarım saat içerisinde gene chatbox Q&A bölümünden yazabilirsiniz. Onlar da daha sonra cevaplandırılıp web sitesinde paylaşılacak. Katılımınız için kendi adıma ve tüm ekip adına teşekkür ediyorum. Önümüzdeki aylarda gene Accelerator programı ile ilgili webinarlarımız ve eğitimlerimiz gene online olarak devam ediyor olacak. TÜBİTAK'tan bu konuda size bilgilendirme gelecektir. Herkese güzel bir gün diliyorum. İyi günler, hoşça kalın. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.